You're finished here. Clean out your locker.
Mike set his multimeter down slowly.
Can I ask why?
Why? Because you're 6 years of dead weight. An illiterate, grease-stained tech who got lucky.
Wexler ripped the badge off Mike's neck and dropped it in the trash bin by the parts cage.
And you smell like it, too. Get out of my building before I have security walk you out.
Mike didn't flinch. Mike looked at his badge in the trash, then at the Meridian line humming behind Wexler. He reached in, took it, and walked out. But in 20 days, the man Wexler called a grease rat would be the only person who could save that machine, and the company along with it. Have you ever watched a man walk back into the building that threw him away and make every suit in the room go silent because you are about to? So drop a comment, hit that like button, and let me take you back to where it all started. Mike Delaine walked out of Ironview Manufacturing for the last time on a Tuesday afternoon in October. He didn't slam the door, didn't curse, didn't make a scene. He carried his toolbox in one hand and his crumpled badge in his jacket pocket. 14 years of his life sat in his chest like a stone he couldn't swallow. The parking lot stretched out gray under a flat sky. 2 workers near the loading dock looked over, then turned away fast. Nobody said goodbye. That was the thing about being erased. It happened so quietly that even the people watching could pretend they hadn't seen it. Mike set his toolbox in the trunk of his old pickup and sat behind the wheel for a long time before he turned the key. Then he called home. "Daddy, are you coming early?" His daughter's voice hit him like something warm, 7 years old, and she already knew the sound of a bad night in his voice before he said a single word. "Yeah, baby girl. Coming home a little late today. Can we make spaghetti? Whatever you want, sweetheart." He hung up before his voice cracked. The drive took 22 minutes. He spent every one of them rehearsing what he'd say. But when he walked through the door and she threw her arms around his waist, he said nothing at all. He picked her up, carried her to the kitchen, and they made spaghetti together. 4 months earlier, Ironview Manufacturing had been a different company. Built over 3 decades, it had earned its name in precision hydraulics and industrial automation, custom rigs, calibration systems, and one machine that separated it from every competitor within 500 miles, the Meridian line, a fully integrated production system capable of manufacturing, testing, and self-calibrating hydraulic components in a single, automated sequence. No other facility in the region had anything close. The Meridian line was why a major client had signed a $14 million annual contract. It was why the company got written up in trade journals. It was the heartbeat of the entire operation. Mike Delaine had built the whole thing. Not managed it, not consulted on it, built it. Every sensor, every calibration sequence, every line of diagnostic logic, 3 years of his life poured into that system, from the first sketch on a napkin in the break room to the final test run that passed clean on the first attempt. The old plant manager, a man named Gene Halston, had given Mike the room and the trust to build something extraordinary. Gene never cared about degrees. He cared about what your hands could do and what your head could see. But Gene retired 18 months ago, and while Mike's title stayed senior maintenance technician, nobody above the new ownership level knew who had really built the Meridian line. The blueprints sat in a filing cabinet with no name on them. Nobody had ever asked whose handwriting it was. Then Preston Wexler walked in. Wexler came from the finance division of a holding company that had acquired Ironview in a portfolio deal. 30 years in mergers and acquisitions, and what he called operational streamlining. He had never turned a wrench, never spent a full shift on a factory floor, never once heard the difference between a machine running right and one choking on borrowed time. What Wexler understood was cost reduction, head count, and efficiency ratios. Within his first 6 weeks, he eliminated 8 positions. 6 of those workers were black. 1 was Latino. The 8th was the one white foreman who had formally objected to the pattern in writing. Wexler never said the word race. He didn't have to. The vocabulary stayed clean. Modernizing the talent pipeline, aligning the workforce with industry benchmarks, bringing in credentialed professionals over clean words, clean suits, dirty results, and everyone on that floor could read between the lines without being told twice. Mike watched it happen from the floor. He watched Darnell Williams get replaced after 9 years on the hydraulic press. 9 years without a single missed shift or a single safety incident. His replacement was 24, with a mechanical engineering degree, and had never touched a hydraulic press outside a university simulation. He watched Sheila Monroe get cut from quality control after 12 years. A woman who could spot a microfracture in titanium housing with her bare eyes and no equipment. Her replacement carried a laptop full of diagnostic software and couldn't tell a stress fracture from a surface scratch. He watched Terrence Oakes pack his locker in silence after 19 years, jaw locked, eyes forward, not a word to anyone, because that was how you survived it. You kept moving, so nobody got to watch what it cost you. The floor felt different after that. The same hydraulic presses cycling, same conveyor hum, same rhythm from the meridian line running underneath it all, but the air had changed. People stopped talking in the break room when certain doors opened. Every friendly nod from management carried a second question folded inside it. Am I next? Mike noticed something else. The new hires, all of them credentialed, all of them young, all of them white, walked the center of every hallway like they'd always belonged there. They didn't ask the veterans anything. They spoke in a vocabulary built to sound expensive and mean nothing on an actual floor. Throughput matrices, human capital optimization, words that meant nothing next to a running press, but sounded impressive in a boardroom. Wexler held a company-wide meeting in his 3rd week. He stood at the front of the cafeteria in a suit that cost more than most workers made in a month, and talked about the future of Ironview. I want to be transparent with all of you, he said, scanning the room with a smile that had no warmth in it. This company has been running on legacy systems and legacy thinking. We need talent that matches the direction we're heading, credentialed, innovative, forward-looking. He never said who he meant. He didn't have to. Everyone in that cafeteria could do the math. The people being shown the door had the most years on the floor and the darkest skin in the building. The people replacing them had the newest diplomas and the lightest. Mike raised his hand. Mr. Wexler, with respect, the Meridian line runs at 98% efficiency. That's higher than any comparable system in the industry. What exactly are we modernizing? Wexler looked at him the way you look at a stain on your shoe. I appreciate the enthusiasm, Mike, but let's leave strategic decisions to people qualified to make them. The cafeteria went silent. 200 people heard it. Not one of them said a word. The plant's operations director found Mike at his workstation afterward. Her name was Diane, and her face was pale. I know what he's doing, she whispered. I've been documenting everything, the termination patterns, the replacement hires, the language in his internal memos. I don't have the power to stop it. Nobody does, Mike said. That's the whole point. Mike told himself he was different. He built the Meridian line. That had to count for something. It didn't. The day Garrett Sullivan walked through the front door, Mike felt it in his gut before his mind caught up. Garrett was everything Wexler wanted the world to see. 28 years old, an MIT graduate, 3 patents in automated manufacturing systems, and a handshake that lasted exactly 2 seconds. Mike Delaine, Garrett said, barely glancing at the name on his coveralls. I'll be running the Meridian line going forward. Wexler wants a more strategic approach. Mike tried to hand over what he could. He walked Garrett through the custom calibration sequences, the harmonic dampeners tuned to a resonance profile he'd engineered specifically for this machine, the hidden diagnostic panel, the 300-cycle thermal drift that required a manual reset no schematic documented anywhere. He tried to explain that this machine had a language and that it spoke to anyone willing to listen. Garrett gave him 10 minutes, then raised a hand. I appreciate the enthusiasm, Garrett said, his smile tightening. But I have 3 patents in this exact field. I think I can figure out a production line. A production line. 14 years of his life reduced to 4 words. 2 days later, Wexler called Mike into the corner office. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. Wexler didn't stand, didn't offer a chair. He slid a manila envelope across the desk the way you'd push trash toward a bin. That night, after his daughter fell asleep, clutching a stuffed rabbit, Mike sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills. Rent was due in 11 days. Her after-school program cost $400 a month. His mother's prescriptions back home needed refilling. His savings held enough for 6 weeks, maybe 5 if anything broke. The 6 weeks was the entire distance between Mike Delaine and the floor. If this story already has your blood boiling, hit that subscribe button, because what Mike does next changes everything. Mike Delaine learned to listen before he learned to read. His grandfather, Earl, ran a small repair shop behind a shotgun house in a town most maps didn't bother naming. No sign out front, just a cinderblock garage where people brought whatever was broken: lawnmowers, window fans, engines 3 other mechanics had already declared dead. Earl fixed them all. He had hands like leather and a voice like gravel, and he believed with total certainty that every machine had a voice. "You hear that, Mike?" he'd say, pressing 6-year-old Mike's palm flat against a sputtering engine block. "That rattle ain't random. She's telling you exactly what's wrong. You just got to learn her language." Mike learned. By 10, he could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded. By 13, he was rewiring panels for neighbors who couldn't afford a licensed electrician. By 16, he was fixing transmissions that certified mechanics had already given up on. Earl never charged what the work was worth. "Fixing things ain't about getting rich," he'd tell Mike over sweet tea at the end of a long Saturday. "It's about making something right that somebody else gave up on. You fix it once, you fix it right, and you fix it so it fixes itself. Fix it once, fix it right, fix it so it fixes itself." That became the only rule Mike ever needed. Earl died when Mike was 19. Heart attack on the garage floor halfway through rebuilding a neighbor's washing machine motor. Mike found him still holding a socket wrench in his left hand. He finished the motor that same afternoon through tears, because you don't leave a job half done. College was never on the table, not because Mike lacked the mind. Every teacher he ever had said the same thing: this kid could go anywhere. But anywhere cost money that didn't exist in his house. His mother worked double shifts as a home health aide. There was no scholarship waiting anywhere for a quiet black kid who was better with machines than standardized tests. So Mike taught himself. Library books, discarded technical manuals pulled from recycling bins, late nights reading everything he could find about hydraulics and industrial automation. So he learned the way Earl taught him, by listening. At 26, Mike took a maintenance job at Ironview. On his 3rd day, a compressor on the main floor seized, an old unit that had been failing for months. 2 outside contractors had already examined it and recommended full replacement at $90,000. Mike asked Gene Halston if he could take a look. Gene studied him for a moment, then handed over the keys to the maintenance cage. It took Mike 4 hours. He found a micro crack in the intake valve housing both contractors had missed, fabricated a replacement part from spare stock, recalibrated the pressure system, and turned the compressor back on. It ran cleaner than the day it was installed. Gene watched the pressure gauges settle and didn't say anything for a long time. Then he looked at Mike. "Who taught you to do that?" "My grandfather. He must have been one hell of a mechanic." "Yes, sir, he was." From that day forward, Gene gave Mike access to everything. Not on paper. Corporate would never have approved a technician without a degree doing design work. But Gene didn't care about paper. He cared about results. Over the next 3 years, Mike designed and built the Meridian line from the ground up, sketching plans on graph paper during lunch breaks, testing prototypes alone on the floor after midnight, solving problems that would have taken a credentialed team months to untangle. He never put his name on the blueprints. Gene told him to. Mike said it didn't matter. "The machine works," he said. "That's what matters." It was Earl talking. Fix it right. Let the work speak for itself. The work spoke, but the people who needed to hear it had already stopped listening. It took exactly 20 days for the Meridian line to begin tearing itself apart. It started small, a calibration drift on the 3rd actuator bank, output tolerances shifting by 0.2%. Garrett flagged it, adjusted the parameters, and filed a report calling it a routine fluctuation. 3 days later, the drift had tripled. Then thermal sensors on the left bank started throwing fault codes that didn't match anything in the manufacturer's database. These codes aren't in any documentation, Garrett told Diane on day 11, the Polish gone from his voice. I've contacted every component supplier. Nothing matches. That's because this system isn't standard, Diane said. Mike built it custom. Then where are his design documents? You'd have to ask Mike. Garrett didn't ask Mike. His pride sat between him and that phone call like a locked door. Instead, he flew in a former classmate who specialized in automated hydraulic systems. The classmate spent 2 days running diagnostics, shook his head, and flew home. The architecture doesn't match anything I've studied, he told Garrett on the way out. It's like someone built a language from scratch and never wrote a dictionary. By day 14, the Meridian line was losing calibration mid-cycle. Finished components were failing quality checks at a rate of 31%. The client's contract specified a defect tolerance under 2%. Production output had dropped by more than half. On day 17, the client's procurement director called the board chairman directly. Lawrence Keating had founded Ironview 42 years ago. He was 81, sharp as a scalpel, and allergic to surprises. If these numbers don't turn around in 2 weeks, we invoke the exit clause. That's 14 million walking out your door. Keating called an emergency board meeting for the following morning. Every chair at that table was full. Wexler stood at the front, with a slide deck revised 4 times since midnight, his voice steady, his hands not. The Meridian line is undergoing a recalibration phase, Wexler said, clicking to a graph that dropped like a cliff. This is expected during any systems transition. Within what? Keating's voice sliced through the room like a saw through pine. A month. A quarter. Their procurement director called me at home yesterday. At home, Wexler. That hasn't happened in 42 years. He let the silence sit. I'm looking at a 60% decline in 17 days. Tell me what happened to my machine. Who built that system, Wexler? Silence spread across the table. Diane straightened in her chair. His name is Mike Delaine. He designed and built the Meridian line from scratch, every component, every calibration protocol, every diagnostic system, over 3 years, while holding the title of Senior Maintenance Technician. And 6 weeks ago, Mr. Wexler terminated his employment and replaced him with Mr. Sullivan. She paused. I'd also like the board to know that 6 of the 8 employees terminated under Mr. Wexler in his first 6 weeks were black, and 1 was Latino. I have the personnel records and dates if anyone would like to see the pattern laid out plainly. The boardroom went still. You fired the man who built the Meridian line? Keating asked. He was maintenance staff, Lawrence. He didn't have the credentials. I didn't ask about credentials, Keating said. I asked whether you fired the man responsible for 40% of this company's revenue, and I'm now asking why nearly every name on that termination list looks the same. Wexler opened his mouth. Nothing useful came out. Keating picked up the phone in the center of the table and dialed a number from memory. Conrad, it's Lawrence Keating. I need you at my plant tomorrow morning. Bring your tools. Dr. Conrad Whitfield arrived at 7 the next morning, now 68 years old, 9 patents in industrial automation, a textbook required reading in most engineering programs on the continent. When Whitfield called a machine extraordinary, careers were made. When he called one broken, careers ended. Whitfield spent 4 hours with the Meridian line. He opened every panel, ran every diagnostic the system would allow, traced hydraulic lines with his fingers, listened to motors with a stethoscope he'd carried since the 80s. When he returned to the boardroom, everyone was waiting. Who built this? His voice was quiet, almost reverent. A man named Mike Delaine, Diane said. Is he here? He was terminated 6 weeks ago. Whitfield cleaned his glasses slowly and put them back on. This is, without exaggeration, the most elegantly engineered production system I have seen in 40 years of consulting. Whoever built it is operating at a level most graduate programs don't teach. He let that land. You need to bring him back today, because whoever has been modifying this machine is systematically destroying it. Every head turned toward Garrett. His face went the color of old cement. Keating rose from his chair. At 81, standing was a statement in itself. Wexler, call Mike Delaine. Get him in this building tomorrow morning, and if he says no, you go to his front door and ask him in person. Mike got the call from Diane at 6 in the morning. He was underneath a neighbor's truck replacing a rusted brake line for $40, the third car he'd fixed that week for whatever people could afford. It wasn't enough, not close, but it kept the lights on and his daughter fed. "Mike," Diane said, her voice tight and careful, "I need you to hear me out before you say anything. I'm listening. The Meridian line is failing. Garrett can't fix it. The board has seen it. Dr. Conrad Whitfield inspected the machine himself. Lawrence Keating is asking for you by name." Mike slid out from under the truck and sat on the cold driveway, phone against his ear, grease on his knuckles, the same hands, the same grease Wexler once called a stain. "Asking for me?" He let the words sit. "Wexler is asking for me." "Not asking?" Diane said. "Keating is ordering him to ask." Mike closed his eyes. He thought about his daughter, about the savings account shrinking from 6 weeks to 4, about the badge sitting on his nightstand next to Earl's photograph. "I'll come," Mike said, "but I have conditions. Name them. I walk through the front door, not the service entrance. I get full access to the floor, no escort, no supervisor looking over my shoulder, nobody telling me what I'm doing wrong. Every worker let go under Wexler gets a personal phone call before I even walk through that door. Done. One more thing. Garrett Sullivan stays in the room the entire time. I want him to see everything." Mike arrived at Ironview at 8 the next morning. Clean work clothes, steel-toed boots, Earl's wrench in his back pocket, not because he needed it, because it was Earl. The floor was quiet the way a hospital gets quiet when the monitors stop beeping. Workers lined the walls. Diane stood near the office entrance. Board members watched from the mezzanine. Keating sat in a metal folding chair someone had carried down. Whitfield leaned against a support column, arms crossed, and Wexler stood in the back corner, hands in his pockets, jaw set tight enough to crack teeth. Garrett waited beside the Meridian line. The machine shuddered every few seconds like a car with bad timing, warning lights blinking in patterns nobody could decode, a distress signal with no translator. Mike didn't greet anyone. He walked straight to the machine, placed both palms flat against the primary drive housing, and closed his eyes. The room watched a man listen to a machine. He opened his eyes. "You replaced the harmonic dampeners on cylinders 2 through 6, he said, without looking at Garrett. "Standard off-the-shelf units." Garrett stiffened. They were upgraded. The originals were non-standard parts. They were non-standard because I made them non-standard. Mike opened the side access panel with a screwdriver from his belt. "This machine doesn't run on factory dampening frequencies. I tuned every dampener to match the resonance profile of the entire integrated system. 1 pulse, 1 rhythm." He pulled out one of the replacements and held it up. "This is a fine part, industry standard, and it's killing the machine. You put a metronome inside a jazz band." That was the first revelation, and Garrett's face said he was only beginning to understand how deep this went. Mike reached into his toolbox and pulled out a handmade dampener, identical to the one he'd fabricated 3 years earlier, and installed it in cylinder 2. The shuddering on that bank stopped immediately, like a fever breaking. Within 20 minutes, all 5 dampeners were replaced. The machine's tremors smoothed out, like a wrinkled sheet, pulled taut, warning lights going dark, one by one. Whitfield stepped closer. "How did you identify a resonance mismatch without running a single diagnostic test?" Mike tapped the housing. "My grandfather used to say a machine tells you what's wrong if you know how to listen. I built this one to speak." I know what it sounds like when it's healthy. He paused, and I know what it sounds like when it's in pain. Mike moved to the rear of the machine, crouched low, and ran his fingers along the base panel until he found a seam that didn't exist on any schematic. He pressed 2 points at once, and a hidden panel clicked open with a hiss of released air. Inside sat a module the size of a shoebox, wired into every sensor, every actuator, every thermal monitor in the entire line. A small green light pulsed steadily on its face. What is that? Whitfield was on one knee beside him now. I call it the pulse, Mike said, connecting a data cable to a laptop from home. Numbers began scrolling across the screen. It's a self-diagnostic archive. I built it into this machine during the 3rd month of construction. It monitors every subsystem in real time. Stress loads, thermal drift, vibration patterns, pressure differentials. Everything this machine feels gets recorded here. Garrett stepped closer, his face drawn tight. There's nothing about this in the blueprints, because I built it from my head. Mike scrolled through the log. The Pulse has recorded every change made to this machine since it went online, including every modification made in the last 20 days. That was the 2nd revelation. The logs told a story of cascading failure, every one of Garrett's changes triggering compounding fault conditions the machine had been calling out about in the only language it had. Nobody had known the module existed. Whitfield read the data in silence, then stood. You embedded a black box into an integrated production system, he said slowly. A self-recording diagnostic archive monitoring the entire platform continuously. I have consulted for 4 continents' worth of manufacturers. None of them have implemented anything this comprehensive at the individual system level. Not one. Mike wasn't finished. He walked to the main control panel and entered a command sequence nobody recognized. The display shifted, revealing a menu that existed in no operating manual. 3 modes, listed vertically: standard, adaptive, full integration. The Meridian line had run in standard mode its entire working life, the only mode anyone at Ironview knew existed. Mike selected adaptive. The machine's rhythm changed, not louder, not quieter, different, fluid, almost organic, adjusting its own speeds and pressures in real time based on the physical properties of each component passing through it. What's happening? Keating leaned forward in his folding chair. This machine was never just a production system, Mike said. In adaptive mode, it reads the density and grain structure of incoming materials and recalibrates its own machining parameters automatically. No human input required. He fed 3 different alloys through the line, one after another, without changing a single setting. Everyone came out with perfect tolerances and 0 defects. That's not possible, Garrett whispered. Adaptive processing at this precision requires neural network integration and multi-sensor fusion architecture. The hardware alone costs hundreds of thousands. It cost whatever I had in the spare parts cage and 3 months of late nights, Mike said, closing the hidden panel. I didn't have a budget, Garrett. I didn't have a team. I had time and my grandfather's philosophy. Fix it so it fixes itself. That was the 3rd revelation, and the floor went completely silent, the silence of people watching something they didn't fully understand but knew was extraordinary. Whitfield turned from the machine to face the board members on the mezzanine, his voice carrying across the entire floor. I want to be precise about what I'm saying. In 40 years of consulting across 12 countries, I have never seen a single engineered production system this sophisticated. He let that settle. You didn't fire a maintenance technician. You fired one of the most brilliant engineers I have ever encountered in my career, and you replaced him with someone who did not understand what he was looking at. Nobody moved. In the back corner, Wexler's face had gone the color of old paper. Keating rose, the metal chair scraping the floor. "Nobody leaves," he said, calm, absolute. "This is not over." He turned to Mike. "I want a full demonstration, every feature, every capability, everything built into this machine and never documented because the man who built it was treated like he didn't exist." Over the next 90 minutes, Mike ran the Meridian line through every system he'd designed, the adaptive material processing, the diagnostic archive and its 3 years of data, an automated quality module that could flag a defective part mid-cycle and reroute it without stopping the line, a predictive maintenance system that could identify which bearing would fail 14 days before it happened, features that could have been patented, licensed, marketed for millions, existing only because one man had built them in silence after hours, on a maintenance salary, with nothing but what he could find in the spare parts cage. If you've made it this far, drop a comment. Tell me if you were Mike, standing in that factory, facing the man who called you a grease rat and worse, finally facing the truth. Would you stay, or would you walk away for good? Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe, because the ending is one you don't want to miss. The boardroom emptied, the floor cleared. 3 people remained: Lawrence Keating, Dr. Conrad Whitfield, and Mike Delaine, sitting in Gene Halston's old office, now redecorated with chrome and frosted glass Wexler had installed. Someone brought coffee in plain ceramic mugs from the break room. "Mike," Keating said, setting his mug down carefully, "I owe you an apology no words can make adequate. What happened to you in this building was wrong, professionally, ethically, personally." Mike held his coffee and didn't drink. "I'd like to offer you the position of chief engineer, full authority over the Meridian line and everything that comes after it, compensation that finally reflects the value you've created here." He paused. "Which is considerable." Whitfield leaned forward. "And I want to extend a parallel offer. I run a consulting firm that partners with the largest manufacturers in the country. I'm offering you a senior consulting role, your name on the publications, your methods in the curriculum." Mike looked at both men, 2 of the most powerful people he'd ever sat across from, offering him everything 6 years of silence and swallowed pride had never earned. He thought about Earl, about his daughter's popsicle stick bridge on the kitchen counter, about the badge on his nightstand beside his grandfather's photograph. "Mr. Keating," Mike said, "I appreciate both offers, more than I can say. But I built the Meridian line in this building. This is where the work lives. This is home." He set his coffee down. "I'll take the chief engineer position on 2 conditions. Name them. First, every worker terminated under Preston Wexler gets a phone call, every single one. I can't guarantee they'll come back, but they deserve the choice." "Done." "Second, my name goes on the Meridian line blueprints, where it should have been from the beginning. It'll be there by end of day." Mike shook Keating's hand, then Whitfield's, steady, not triumphant, not bitter, the grip of a man finally seen for exactly who he was. The board voted unanimously the following week. Wexler was removed as chief executive, the official motion citing gross mismanagement of human capital and systematic suppression of critical engineering documentation. Those were the clean words. Everyone in the room understood the real ones. An internal investigation followed. Under Wexler's 8-week tenure, 12 experienced employees had been terminated. 10 were racial minorities. Their replacements in every case had less hands-on experience. Performance metrics had declined across every affected department. The pattern was not subtle. It was not ambiguous. It was exactly what it looked like. Wexler's severance package, originally structured at over $1 million, was voided under the misconduct clause buried in his own contract. His attorney filed a formal objection. The board's legal team responded with the pulse diagnostic logs, Diane's archive of suppressed reports, and sworn statements from 6 of the terminated employees. The objection was withdrawn within 8 days. Garrett Sullivan submitted his resignation the morning after the board vote. No press conference, no statement, packing his office quietly, the same way Darnell and Sheila and Terrence had packed theirs weeks earlier. But before he left, he found Mike alone in the maintenance bay, recalibrating the thermal array. "I didn't know," Garrett said from the doorway, hands at his sides. "About the pulse, the adaptive system, none of it. Wexler told me this was legacy equipment running outdated protocols that I was brought in to modernize." Mike set down his wrench. "And you believed that? I wanted to believe I was the best person for the job." Mike looked at him directly. "You're not a bad engineer, Garrett. You're just not a humble one. You walked in assuming 3 patents meant you understood a machine you'd never touched. Next time someone tries to show you how something works, let them finish." Garrett nodded once and walked out of Ironview for the last time. Word traveled through the industry the way it always does, quiet at first, then all at once. Wexler's name became a cautionary tale. The executive who fired his best engineer because of the color of his skin and nearly took the company down with him. The client didn't just renew the contract, they expanded it. The new agreement was worth $17 million annually, $3 million more than the original deal. Their procurement director called Keating personally. "Whatever you did to fix things, keep doing it." "I didn't fix anything," Keating said. "I just stopped breaking what was already working." Darnell came back. So did Sheila and Terrence. Not everyone answered the call. Some had moved on. Some had built new lives. Some couldn't bring themselves to walk through those doors again. But the ones who returned found a different Ironview waiting for them. One where the chief engineer was a man who'd built the best machine in the building from spare parts, and a dead man's philosophy. 6 months later, Mike Delaine stood in his office on the mezzanine above the factory floor. Below him, the Meridian line hummed at full capacity. 0 defects, clean rhythm, the steady pulse of a machine that knew exactly what it was built to do. On his desk, beside a photograph of his daughter, sat a worn socket wrench with a wooden handle darkened by decades of grip. Earl's wrench, the only inheritance that ever mattered. His daughter visited that afternoon. She stood at the observation rail watching the Meridian line work, eyes wide with wonder. "You built that, Daddy?" "Yeah, baby girl, I built that." She reached for his hand and held it tight. "Can you teach me?" Mike smiled. "Fix it once. Fix it right. Fix it so it fixes itself. If this story moved you, if you believe talent deserves to be recognized no matter where it comes from, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe for more stories like this one and leave a comment below. Have you ever been underestimated because of the way you looked, where you came from, or what was missing from your resume? Tell me your story. I'll be reading everyone.